Next on the agenda is the feasibility study presentation. Mr. Gallahue.
Thank you. First of all, I just want to make sure everybody understands that this document is online. I do have a couple of copies available on the back table if somebody wants a hard copy, but I think the Lorax would prefer if we tried to use the electronic versions. So, in any case, thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the Board of Education. The feasibility study is a way for staff to convey the annual enrollment projections, evaluate feasible redistricting. Our intent is to have a clear review of long-term capital planning and redistricting options. Briefly, there are many contributors to the document. Obviously, my staff, the Office of School Planning, school construction staff in the information systems development and support teams, pupil transportation, but we also depend on staff from Howard County government, particularly Department of Planning and Zoning, as well as staff from state agencies, including Maryland Department of Planning and the Maryland State Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. Policy 6010 school attendance areas identifies minimum and maximum target enrollments of 90 to 110%, respectively. This is one of the standards by which the board may consider attendance area adjustments. Such conditions exist, and staff is recommending redistricting. Feasibility study is the link between the capital planning and redistricting process. It's to give the board a first look. This document initiates a capital budget review cycle for fiscal year 2013, and this process will actually conclude next summer and finally result in the Apfo chart next year. So this is an entire process. We start with the feasibility study. We learn about the projections, about potential capital projects, redistricting. We go into the capital budget process, and ultimately we end up with the open and closed chart. Ways to measure success are a more predictable CIP and redistricting as needed. Desired outcomes. A review and comment from the Board of Education. We are recommending redistricting plans that the Board of Education will deliberate and decide upon this fall. These plans would be effective August 2013. Direction to proceed or defer on these plans is needed. Staff will take input at many stages, starting with the publication of this document. This is the beginning of an extensive, transparent process which is necessary for such a complex matter. Staff can make adjustments based upon these comments. This slide, I'd like to take a few minutes to help everyone to understand the process, or a few moments, I should say. On the green side, on the left, you can see what we do every year. Every year we develop an enrollment projection. We discuss a feasibility study. We consider whether redistricting is necessary or not, and take direction whether to go forward with that. We go on to do the capital budget, and the board ultimately makes a decision on the capital budget, which is forwarded to the county council. But if redistricting is proceeded with, we establish goals. We have an attendance area review committee, Board of Education review of the staff recommendation. If we do the redistricting, it may affect the capital budget because we take advantage of capacity through redistricting. If we choose not to do redistricting, we'll monitor for future projections. If we do redistricting, there'll be a circular with maps, and school locator that's online will be adjusted, and the Board of Education will have an opportunity to assess the process. Now let's take a look at the new projection. The projection in this document was generated this past January, and we use a historic cohort survival method. The number of students that survive from one grade level to the next is a factor. New housing is a factor. Resale of existing housing stock. Turnover of apartments. Births within the school attending area. We use this to project the total student enrollment each year for September 30th of each subsequent future year. So this graphic here is showing 3 different years of projections together. We're showing The 2011 projection in blue, 2010 in a fuchsia, and the 2009 in a sort of a mustard yellow. And you can see that at the elementary level, this is a higher projection than the past 2 years. The trend is for elementary enrollment to increase over 3,380 students by 2020 overall, system-wide. The 2020 capacity utilization for all elementary schools combined would be exceeding 107%. One new elementary school is recommended for 2013, as you're well aware. A second is being considered for the end of the decade. Middle school projections. The trend for 2010 is for middle school enrollment to increase by over 1,800 students through 2020. Much of this increase is after 2013, and this is a similar curve to last year's projection. High school projection, again, we're not seeing a major difference between the 2011 and the 2010 projection. The trend in this projection is for high school enrollment to increase by approximately 1,800 students by 2020. Now let's turn to the capital side, because you can either redistrict to use existing capacity or you can build additional capacity. So this graphic is in the feasibility study if you want to study it more closely, but what we are seeing here in white are all the projects that have already been discussed in previous CIP. The feasibility study is introducing some new concepts which are shown in yellow. 100-seat addition at Running Brook, 150-seat for 2014, 156-seat addition at Wild Lake Middle for 2016, and the new elementary school number 42 in 2019. Now, before we get into the details of the recommended redistricting, let's just take a look at the overall strategy for the elementary level. The first part of the strategy is something that we spent a lot of time talking about already, is in the Northeast, a new school for 2013 or 2014. Combining the Columbia East and Columbia West areas, we're looking at additions and considering redistricting. And these schools that I have shown here on this map, there's other schools that are in this area, but these are the ones that were listed on page 4 or 5 of the feasibility study, which are currently above 110% utilization, are projected to see significant student population growth over the next several years, and have no approved capital plans for classroom additions, which can entirely handle the growth. So these are the schools that we should probably be keeping in the back of our mind when we talk about redistricting plans. And I don't think these are necessarily a surprise, these schools. Finally, and a part of the recommendation for redistricting this year is additions and redistricting in 2012. And this redistricting is something that we've talked about in the past, is to redistrict to the west to take advantage of capacity that's available in the west. Now, this is the overall redistricting plan for 2012, and I'm just going to put it up there. It's also available in the back if somebody wants to look at it up close and personal. And I believe that my staff has been able to produce a clear set of maps this year in the feasibility study. So that would be on page 40. If somebody wanted to look at it in the feasibility study. But I'm going to help you to zero in on it a little bit closer here. First part of the redistricting is in the very southeast of the county, with a movement of part of the Laurel Woods attending area to Forest Ridge. Then we would have a move from Forest Ridge to Bowman Bridge. And similarly, Bowman Bridge to Guilford. Sometimes we refer to that as domino. I don't want to understate the importance of considering redistricting carefully, but at some point you do have to trade attending areas from one school to the next in order to access the available capacity. There's an attending area for Atholton that is going to, part of it would be going to Guilford. The other part would be going to Hammond. There's an area that's currently assigned to Guilford. Part of it would be going to Atholton. Part of it would be going to Hammond. Areas that are assigned to Hammond would go to Fulton to help us access the capacity in the west. And then we would take advantage of capacity that's available at Pointers Run. And then Dayton Oaks. So this is the overall plan, and I can call people's attention to the specific page where that plan is listed as 31 of the feasibility study. I'd also like to talk about the 2013 redistricting. We've planned this overall as a comprehensive elementary redistricting strategy, but because of the timing for the capital facilities, we are currently recommending they be split in between 2012 and 2013. Obviously, looking at this top-level map, you can see that we're looking at the northeast part of the county and creating a new attending area for a new school. You're seeing the names of schools that you've heard about, particularly like Bellows Spring, which are contributing to the need for the new school. So, in order to see that a little closer, this is our first look at the new attending area for elementary school number 41. It would be comprised of Elkridge, Bellows Spring, and Waterloo, portions of their attending areas. In order to balance this, we would then make some changes around the edges. And again, this is the current staff recommendation. There's an extensive public process that will follow. This area is recommended from Elkridge to Rockburn. Deep Run to Bellows Spring. Deep Run to Bellows Spring. Jeffers Hill to Bellows Spring. Waterloo to Jeffers Hill. Talbot Springs needs relief, so this current recommendation is to Stevens Forest. This would be recommended for Bellows Spring to Rockburn, Bellows Spring to Ilchester, and Rockburn to Ilchester. We haven't seen anything about veterans at this point, but you've heard quite a bit about veterans. And at this point, staff is, in this feasibility study, recommending redistricting to balance the capacity in the northern region and provide relief to veterans. This recommendation includes an area being moved from veterans to Hollifield Station, veterans to St. John's Lane, and then St. John's Lane to Waverly. There's always the option in public discourse of no action. And it's important for the board to understand the repercussions of not taking action. The redistricting that we've recommended for 2012, the capital project that we've recommended for 2013, and the associated redistricting, if we were not able to accomplish them, we would see areas of school assignment that are above the board's target policy of 110% utilization. And those are illustrated in this graphic in red and orange. So you can see schools like Veterans, Phelps Luck, Waterloo. You can see Athelton Elementary, Talbot Springs, Laurel Woods, Gorman Crossing. In orange also you see Bellows Spring and Elkridge. Green indicates schools that will be within the target range, 90 to 110% utilization. Blue indicates available capacity and an opportunity for redistricting. And I'd like you to note that the available capacity that is positioned most closely to the need is near the southeast region, which hence our recommendation for redistricting in 2012. Relocatable classroom capacity is not included in this discussion per the policy. But it's important to recall that we have installed relocatable classrooms to ease crowding. Indeed, decisions made by this board in the past winter are being implemented as we speak in order to balance capacity temporarily. If we were able to accomplish the redistricting in 2012 and 2013 with the opening of the new capital facility, we could see this type of utilization. You can see much more of the areas are shown in green. There are some schools shown red and orange that are remaining. Rockburn is shown, but it will become green because of a declining demographic trend at that school. Laurel Woods crowding is not permanently resolved by the staff recommendations in this plan, but it is significantly better. We're going to continue to monitor these conditions. There certainly is a transitional nature to some of the populations where there's a larger apartment, a larger portion of apartments in the attending area, and so it's important to just keep an eye on how the projections are going. Running Brook and Swansfield are shown as higher in this graphic. Despite the new capacity at Running Brook, future planning studies will focus on these schools as a part of the coming downtown development. You might remember there was a part of the approval for the downtown development that included a school study. In the northeast, we see the new school is shown in light blue. And I don't want you to worry, it will turn a different color shortly. This is just the first year out for that school, but it's designed to fit it. And as I had mentioned earlier, we believe that a second elementary school is warranted. Other areas of light blue in the east, Hammond, Fulton, and Thunder Hill will grow into their target, the board's established target range, and capacity will remain in the west. This plan does not entirely access the capacity in the west, and that's an important response because there are going to be questions about redistricting plans and whether they transport students too far, and I think that the fact that capacity has been left on the table in the west shows that we right-size this redistricting given all the different considerations that are in policy, including distance traveled. So the recommendations are to initiate the 2012 elementary redistricting in the southeastern region to utilize, to do the redistricting, utilize capacity. 2013, the elementary redistricting, this timing is site-dependent, but we're going to continue planning for 2013, and we're going to monitor future projections and reevaluate other plans annually.
Missing E.
All righty. Questions and comments?
Board members, Mrs. and Mr. Dyer.
Mr. Gallahue, thank you for the rundown. I'm wondering, I know that you have some tools to measure the various districts as far as feeder systems. And I was wondering, when you were doing this initial workup, did you check on those to see whether or not the approach that you're taking is going to improve the feeds for the schools, or is it going to?
Yes, we did. And I want to direct you to where that is in the document.
It's on the top.
On page 38, the 2012 plan assessment is included. Now, the supplement has assessments for all of the recommendations in the document. The supplement's up online. We show one of the measures that we talk about is the balance of feeds and the creation of double. So we do not increase the situation of someone going from a small feed at the elementary level and then going from a small feed to the high school level from their middle school. That's shown down near the bottom, double small feeds. And the other thing I can tell you, that when we look at these redistricting plans in our scenario testing mode, we develop our plans for the elementary and the middle out a couple of years together to make sure that if we need to do redistricting at the middle level because of a feed situation, we recommend it. And I think I can call your attention to a good example of that. On page 45, in the proposed middle school redistricting, there's Dunlog into Patapsco, and that shape might look familiar because that's the veterans redistricting also. So we're avoiding a feed concern. In fact, that map could almost fool you as it being the elementary redistricting recommendation.
It looks like the same map, yeah.
So I guess those are the two ways tonight that I can address the answer to your question. But there's always a way to provide more detail, and I think that's what the attendance area committee can look at in terms of specifics about scenarios and testing them and seeing whether they're creating additional feed concerns. When staff puts plans together, we are guided by a policy of 15% or larger for feeds. And so we don't present plans to the board that create less than 15% feed. There will be plans that we recommend that are right at 15% because, unfortunately, it's not possible to have perfect plans. But in this case, we're not recommending anything that would bring it below 15%.
Mrs. French and then Mr. Meshkin.
Well, we have first the issue of this is a report. So is this, Dr. Cousin, Ms. Perkins, is this coming back at the next board meeting for action?
Is it coming back on the 21st, Joel?
I think, let me get my calendar. 21st?
No, it's not. This is
No?
action.
We do not have it scheduled.
I did not see it on the quarterly agenda, and yet it really should be a report tonight, which is on the agenda, but not.
We don't have it scheduled to come back as an action. What the report is tonight and what the guidance we're asking for is whether we should initiate the process.
Well, we can't give guidance. That's action. And that, well,
I haven't done it in the last couple years.
Yeah.
I went back to the old agendas just
been a
because
while.
I was looking. It's presented as it's a presentation report, and then the committee is convened and moves forward, and then when recommendations come in the fall.
You described the role of the attendance
Yes, sir.
area committee.
The attendance area committee is advisory to the superintendent, so it's a part of the staff recommendation, and it's really conceived out of I guess a trial of fire that I wasn't fortunately present for, but there were times where the lines to testify went around the building, and the idea is to that staff, as capable as we are and with the technology that we have available to us, can present plans, but it is necessary to bounce them off of a group of people. So we have some veterans, I believe, of that process. And so the attendance area committee per policy is 12 members, and we have geographic representation on the committee. There is the possibility of having a student member. And these are not light meetings. They're completely public. It's not, I would say it's some of the more challenging moments I've experienced, although it's interesting. But part of it, what I always tell people when I interview them about participating, is that you're going to be sitting around a table discussing plans, and there will be a group of people sitting in chairs watching you while you work. It's about as transparent as standing in the display window of a retail store. So I at least in my opinion.
I was going to say it was a zoo.
And I try to prevent it from being a zoo, but I am only one person.
if I could, but I remember when you're going to bring the list of names of the committee members to the board.
Yes.
That has come to us in the past. Well, where I'm going is that you have language such that you seek direction from the board, you want approval for the committee. Page 21 says about West Friendship, staff seeks confirmation from the board on a change in strategy for West Friendship. All of those are actionable. And so I'm asking about process, about when do we deliberate on these things? Or is this just a document that we take action on after the, I don't know.
I don't think.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I had one more question before.
Since the sort of feasibility study process started, none of us have had to essentially review this other than to say, okay, we're not going to redistrict this year.
That the recommendation is not,
Right.
that the recommendation for, and then whatever that
So,
recommendation would be to formulate a committee so that the superintendent can make a recommendation,
Exactly.
and then we act
To
on
the
that.
extent
I mean,
there are-
as I recall, since this process began, that's what the process has been.
And to the extent that, I highlighted a couple of those issues too, Mrs. French, as far as, direction. I think part of it might be that, for example, you say the plan presents a strategy which uses West Friendship Elementary School capacity as long as possible. Staff seeks confirmation from the board that this change in strategy for West Friendship Elementary School, blah, blah, blah. I think Mrs. French's point is, in the past, and I think it was my first year on the board, it was dropped in, the statement was dropped into this report that there's the possibility.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that
we
we
never
might-
approved
we might
that
wanna
strategy in the
consider,
first place.
Ultimately closing West Friendship, and it really wasn't, it's kind of funny, because for some reason I was going through the report that year, I zeroed in on that, I was like, oh my gosh, we're going to have an uproar from the West Friendship community, fearful that their school is going to be closed in short order. We all know that that's a, 18-month to 22-month process. So, I mean, I have no problem if the board, I think, tries to answer those questions and give that direction tonight, as long as it's clear what you're asking and we can confirm that whatever. I like the report. I think it's every year it's incredibly comprehensive. It puts everything out there, and since this is the type of stuff that got me involved in the first place, we are miles ahead of where we were 15 years ago.
So, Mr. Meshkin, go ahead.
That's okay if you have.
I'm sorry,
I
I
just
didn't mean to
wanted-
interrupt anyone.
I just wanted to clarify that the recommendations that you have in here for the elementary schools, does that take into consideration the new Northeast?
There's two parts to that. There's the 2012 redistricting
Right.
does not take into account
2012 does
Northeast.
not.
And it is severable.
Well, they're disconnected, I
Right.
think is a better word.
But the but the 2013 does.
Yeah, for the most part. You could take it out the northern portion is
I think if you look at 2013 as sort of the second phase.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was all developed as an entire comprehensive elementary redistricting strategy. I think it's important to emphasize that because we don't just redistrict one school, back and forth. But the sequencing of these things is complicated. So at the moment, we have it recommended as 2 different years of redistricting.
And then just recommend.
And I just want to clarify one other thing, that the Talbot Springs redistricting would open it up then throughout those years for downtown development.
Right. There's probably more analysis needed, which is why we have, for the overall downtown, there's other schools that come into play there, Running Brook in particular. So I think that we would want to come back to that with the 2013 redistricting.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Meshkin.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Gallagher, thank you so much for your presentation. Obviously, the school that my kids go to, Fulton Elementary, is in the crosshairs for 2012, and I appreciate the fact that I've seen from this feasibility study compared to last year's feasibility study that you took into consideration some of the analysis of the citizens that live in Ashley Knowles and their request for moving into Pointers Run rather than being pulled out to Dayton Oaks as last year's feasibility study proposed as part of the model.
again, we came back to the policy considerations in terms of transportation. That's the main reason for the recommendation. I'm always happy to take input from citizens, but we focused on what the policy considerations led us to.
No, and I appreciate that, and that's a definite delta between the two feasibility studies. I echo Mrs. French's concern. Being new to the process, I was a little green behind the ears, if you will, trying to understand exactly what the purpose of this document was. Is it giving the green light to go ahead with redistricting, or is it giving the green light to form an attendance area review committee that's going to hit us with the proposal? Because to me, are we giving a green light on redistricting, or are we giving a green light to plan for redistricting? I'm not exactly quite sure what is the green light that we're giving.
We're definitely not asking approval of the redistricting. We're asking for approval to form the attendance area committee to go through the process.
But in years past, we would say there's no need for redistricting, so there's no need to put together the attendance area. Now we're saying what?
We're saying we need to have the committee and look at 2012 redistricting.
So if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. I mean, we're putting together the committee to plan for redistricting.
Correct. And if you think about staff presentations to the board and the time that the normal time frame for any policy recommendation or whatever, that was how redistricting recommendations were done before this process, and I guess it just wasn't enough ramp time for people. So I think the major factor of having feasible redistricting discussed this early in the year is to put people on notice that we're thinking about it. But what will come out of the committee and ultimately what is decided in October or November could be different.
Okay. With that in mind, there are obviously alternatives to redistricting. Mm-hmm. I brought, excuse me, forgive me the allergies. I brought up numerous times beforehand the idea of having open enrollment and other options that can be used to mitigate some of the issues. And I believe some of my colleagues on the board mentioned that at the time the feasibility study emerges, that would be the time or the appropriate time for discussions on those issues. Is that an issue that this attendance area review committee would be discussing, or is that something that we discuss as a board?
I would
help clarify the process for me. I
looked at the policy 9000, and so the first part of thinking about open enrollment is to look at and study policy 9000. And I do not believe that the policy 6100, the attendance area review, I don't think it anticipated the committee analyzing what might be a part of policy 9000. The board is the decision maker ultimately with that. But the second part is I did take a look at some of the recommendations that staff has made based on past experience, because you had raised this point before, and I thought it would be worthwhile to at least have something on that. And the recommendation was not to continue with the open enrollment because it wasn't serving the capacity utilization objective, in addition to the significant amount of work that went into managing a program of open enrollment. They weren't, the enrollments at the open schools were not coming into the board's target, at least at that time. So that's what the past is telling us. I don't know what future discussions will lead us.
What was the date on that assessment? Time for that 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 20 years ago?
There was analysis done in 2001, and there was subsequent analysis done in 2006 and presented to the board.
Okay. And so when making a decision around redistricting, because redistricting obviously can be a painful process, not only for those of us that have to govern the redistricting process, but ultimately the students who are affected, what are the alternatives?
For redistricting?
Mm-hmm.
Overcrowded schools.
Well, and that's the default if we do nothing. I'm saying, what are the alternatives to addressing the default?
They're probably myriad. I mean, that's when we look at scenario testing for redistricting. I'm answering the question specifically about using redistricting policy to make changes to attending areas. Yeah, the possibilities could be pretty significant. So what we do with our groups is we take ideas. Perhaps there's an idea that comes into BOE. At hcpss.org, and the committee takes that idea, we test it out, and we make a poster, so that's Plan B. And another idea might come in a letter, or maybe it comes up during a discussion of the committee, and gradually we develop a kind of a rubric of ideas, and it always seems that you come back after looking at a number of these different scenarios to a couple of important considerations that, as long as I've been a planner, I frankly have to admit I might not have come to sitting at my desk with the software and technology that I have. It's just something about that human milieu and the ability to talk about the plans that is valuable, and I think it helps to bring the staff recommendation back to the board, and the board can feel much more confident that there's been that the trial by fire on the ideas, and it's been talked about and tested, and there's a record of all those discussions. So there, I would say the last time we did it, we had about 8 or 9 different plans that we played around with, and you'll find back in the past with some of the big redistrictings, like the opening of Reservoir High School, for example, you'll hear people still talk about the gray plan or the purple plan or whatever. It can really be a very emotional experience to talk about redistricting, and so people remember these things.
Yeah, and I appreciate that explanation. Not going a deep dive into the alternatives on redistricting, when we're faced with the problem, as Mrs. French was saying, overcrowded schools, what are the alternatives that we examine from a school planning standpoint outside of redistricting?
From a capital standpoint, the alternatives are building an addition or bringing in portables, which we do all the time.
Or a new school.
Or building a new school.
Yeah.
And that's all we have on the table currently.
From a school planning perspective, yes.
Okay.
If I could just add, it's a long time ago now, late 90s maybe. We did look at split shifts, and we looked at the possibility of year-round school, but it would only work for elementary schools, and there was a great public outroar, including a senator who introduced legislation to forbid us to do that. There was a third alternative that we looked at, and they were all unacceptable to the community. And when we have the guide or the idea that every child should have access to an equitable education, they were discarded because they weren't equitable. Now, there had been open enrollment at one time, but it just did not work, because what happened were that the haves had the money to provide their own transportation, and they were able to pick a school that they wanted based upon the test scores and dictate where their kid would go. And it just was not equitable. It didn't work.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Mesh.
I appreciate Mrs. French's explanation of what's happened beforehand. I think it was very well reasoned, but all because something wasn't implemented well doesn't necessarily mean that it can't be implemented well. There are a lot of people that tried to sell books online, and there's only one Amazon.com. And so what I'm trying to better understand is, in light of the fact that we're dealing with student populations that tend to move quicker than we can build buildings and put on additions, and then we look at doing things such as redistricting, which I think generally the community frowns upon for the most part, are there ways that we can look at other ways of doing things? For example, I bring up the idea of open enrollment. For example, let's take the scenario you specifically spoke of. Let's say you have you have students in a particular school, let's say at Bowman Bridge, looking at this particular slide here, slide 11. And there are students that go to Bowman Bridge that want to go open enrollment to Dayton Oaks, and we say, well, gosh, that's unfair, because this particular family has the means to be able to provide transportation to Dayton Oaks, and those poor kids that are left behind didn't have that opportunity. Well, those poor kids that were left behind now have a smaller class with greater attention from a teacher, because there's less kids in that classroom, so we vicariously reduce class size. And so I think that we need to look at things in such a way I'm really concerned with giving the green light on a tactical implementation of redistricting at this stage on just a report that we're not acting on, in light of the fact that I don't think we have really vetted 5 years from the previous evaluation. It seems like we did one 5 years ago, we did one 10 years ago. It seems like we're due for our cyclical 5-year evaluation of open enrollment before giving the green light to go ahead with redistricting. That's the reason why I bring up the issue, because things do change.
Okay, Mrs. Valancourt.
I'm wondering, are we not looking at those things because they didn't work out 5 and 10 years ago? Are we open to looking at them again? Year-round schools being, as an option, being one of the things that, times have changed. People might be more interested. I know that, I believe Mrs. French had told me about a survey that was done that surprisingly people were looking to take if they given the choice, they would take the winter break option.
That was the pilot that Dr. Kalin did at Centennial Lane Elementary School. And I was surprised because about 30% of the parents chose to have their longest break in the winter. And I think it may have been unique to the community in that then they had the time to visit family in another part of the world, so that based upon their school schedule, et cetera. Or maybe they just like to go skiing and have their long vacation there. But I was surprised that 30% did choose that rather than the summer.
That 30% probably looked at an actual year-round calendar and discovered that everybody gets a long summer vacation, whether they're tracked out in the summer on purpose or not. So doing a winter because of the way.
I know, I'm just not sure what you're saying.
Because there are a lot of things about the year-round schools I think we should take another look at, and you immediately reduce overcrowding by 25%. I mean, you add 25% to the school capacity by making it possible to do 4 tracks in 3.
Well, that's one definition of year-round school. I mean, that's part of the
Well, that would be
issue.
the one that would be reasonable for us to look at.
No, but I'm saying that when you talk about year-round school, there are at least 25 different models of what that means.
Well, let's not look at one of the ones that doesn't achieve our problem.
No, but I'm saying when you ask people, too, their interpretation of what that means is different. And so saying that there's a single model that automatically will increase your occupancy by a certain amount, in some schools that may not, you might still have to redistrict in order to make that work equitably over the 4 based on how you decide to use it. That's not exclusive. No, but I'm saying it's not a way to get out of redistricting. A year-round school is not necessarily a way to
It's not necessarily, but it may be. I think Mrs. Valancourt's point was not to per se get into the weeds right here, because we're probably not equipped at this point in time to be able to get in the weeds, but to give a charge moving forward on something without thinking about other alternatives, to me, seems a little impetuous. It does.
And have we talked about or looked into the possibility of leasing space for an interim, reduction in overcrowding for?
Space where?
Don't know. Just as an option that we can't build right away.
But you still have to redistrict the students to that space.
Just from a technical
we're trying to get rid of overcrowding in addition to.
The IAC
I'm
wouldn't
hearing a lot
necessarily allow you
of good concepts, but practically speaking, to really vet out any one of these things that we've talked about would significantly cut into the process time that we have to get going if we're going to get going.
Well, Mr. Roy, I appreciate that, but as these issues have been brought up beforehand, we've been told that this is the appropriate time, and honestly, it's a little frustrating as someone who brings up a lot of these new ideas and then is told, well, this is going to be the appropriate time to then bring them up, and then be told at that appropriate time that it's not the appropriate time.
It's too late now?
So it's a little bit of a bait and switch. I appreciate where you're coming from, but it is a little frustrating.
Question first. How long?
I don't know about bait and switch.
When you talk about the process of looking into this, you're talking about what time frame? You're talking about a year? You're talking about months?
Which one are all of them?
I don't understand the survey. Was it a survey before? How was this vetted through the community?
For open enrollment?
For either or open enrollment or year-round schools.
Year-round took more than a year of study.
I believe Mr. Plunkett's analysis in 2006 was 4-month windows, something like that.
So I think you brought up a point, but I mean, obviously, it takes time. So I don't think for this season, for this year, that it's a possibility. I don't. So I think we need to. My next question is when were you planning on forming this committee? When you're starting getting the June, July?
Yeah, the schedule. If we went forward with a committee this year, we would do most of the work with the committee through June, July, and August, and have regional meetings September 6th and 7th, and then come back to the board with a draft, or no, come back to the board with a document on October 13th, and then there, of course, be the presentations and work sessions. And again, these meetings where we talk about all these different options within the box of redistricting of attending areas are open to anyone. And so there shouldn't be any surprises for board members in October about the various, you don't necessarily have time to go to everything, but there shouldn't be any surprises. And if you do need additional backup on scenarios that were rejected and not brought forward, we can answer those questions. We can bring attendance area committee members up to the podium to answer questions about the plans.
So you have the committee ready to go based on the recommendations through the feasibility study to look at redistricting for 2012, correct?
Yeah, the whole idea is for a 2012 opening, August 2012 opening.
I just want to clarify that.
Is that for both elementary and middle school levels?
No, just elementary, and it's this picture here is what we're talking about for 2012.
And then 2013 includes both.
It goes up a little bit to the north to take care of the northeast region, and it's at the elementary level.
You're cleaning it, I'm not sure who was
It
first.
doesn't matter.
I can wait.
I was just going to say that the possibility for open enrollment still exists within Policy 9000. What it says is that the board will designate schools as open, and the general premise for that is that you are filling the schools that are under capacity. You don't, under the scenario that exists in 9000, we don't indicate schools that would feed it. We just indicate that there are schools that are open. So if we were to change that, that would require a change to policy. It's not something that would just happen. It would require a review and a change in how we decide we're going to implement something that is open enrollment. And if that's something that
we do have
the
that
board
within
wants
policy
do.
to act upon. The board could act upon that. It is within policy. We wouldn't have to create a policy on open enrollment.
No,
It
but
does
you'd have
exist.
to change the policy. You'd have to change the policy. It's not just a matter of saying we can do it. It would actually require a policy change, which has a process that you go through in order to do it. That's all I'm saying. It was left in when the determination was made that they weren't necessarily going to utilize it because it wasn't effective, but they saw that there might be opportunities in the future where you would want to take advantage of that option. So it's still there, and there's still provisions around it in Policy 9000. That's all I was bringing up.
Mr. Dyer, then Mr. Aquino.
Joel, I know in the past, parents have brought in plans, and you've looked at them and everything, but I seem to remember that there was a little bit of frustration because the parents didn't have access to the tools, to the data. And I wonder where we are now. Are we still with the same old software, the same hardware, or have we upgraded some? And is there any possibility that our parents could have the ability to come up with the same modeling tools that you're using, so that first off it'd be apples and apples instead of apples and oranges that you're looking at, and we'd have a lot of different eyes on this. Because this is the process that you know, and you know it will work. But if we could make it more accessible to everyone, we might very well get, I think you were saying that earlier, that having different ideas is a good thing.
Okay, so no one who has ever made an appointment to come and test out a redistricting plan has given me the feedback that they were unsatisfied with their ability to evaluate their plan. So I believe that anyone that makes the appointment and goes over the redistricting plan with us will go away, maybe not satisfied that their plan was successful in terms of the 11 criteria in the policy, or that staff adopted their plan or became a proponent of their plan, but they at least will feel that they had been heard and that they had an opportunity to express their plan at the same level playing field as the other plans that are in this document or maybe come up during the committee. But to the technical part of your question, we purchased a server that is capable of spinning the GIS data, but we're going to need to do some development because that was a unique the scenario testing software was a unique in-house product. And there are people out there that will represent that they sell the same thing, and every time I look at it, it's not really working for what we need to do. So we know where we want to go. We've put the infrastructure in place, but that is not going to be available for this redistricting process this year. I hope to have it available next year, and I think that that's another way to include people. But with that being said, you test out a plan, and you test it out with a group of people, and they have a chance to talk about the plan, pros and cons, in that same setting. That's one experience. If you sit at home by yourself at a computer and you test out a plan, and then you talk about that plan one-on-one with different people, that's a very different experience. I like the experience in terms of the public, where we can have an attendance area committee with minutes. We can talk about it. I'm not saying we don't put things up and make it available to people online, but at some point there's going to be a need for that to come back into the room with the rest of the attendance area committee for people to discuss it.
If you have the same, if you have common data sets and data structures, that would really be... And
to that point, when somebody has what they think is a great idea, and we go through it in my office, and then it's time for, I'll talk to them. Do you want me to bring this back to the attendance area committee? Are you satisfied? Do you know enough? Do you want them to hear about where we went? Because maybe it didn't work out. It wasn't as good a plan as they thought it was. Sometimes they tell me, tell the committee about it. Other times they say, no, I'm satisfied. I know what I want to know. And so,
but it might be something that next time around we'd be, have even more access than people having to come in and sit down with you.
Yeah, thank you for that support.
Okay.
Mr. Meshkin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Gallagher, is there a... I'm sorry, was it Frank's turn? Go ahead. Sorry.
He put his card back, so I thought he...
No,
It's up.
I was
It's not back, it's
trying
up.
to cue you as to, I was going to make a suggestion. This map right here, if you scroll down 3 or 4, you see a map that says 2013 utilization with no action. Do you have a 2012 utilization with no action?
Frank and I are on the same page.
Exactly.
That's what I was going to ask.
And if so,
I
think I'd like to see it. I don't know, hopefully you might have it, because that would then at least show graphically what the impact of delaying for a year might be.
Well, that's what I was going to propose, to give us the time to consider these
that then
alternatives.
gives time for further study, or occasionally you get lucky. You delay a year and the numbers change. I mean, I don't think it's going to happen this time around, but...
I think that if you're looking at this map, let me get it up.
Which one is this?
That's exactly what I was thinking, Frank. It was the same thing. If we could delay the 2000.
The pre-measures. This is the pre-measures map, and what you can probably do with the feasibility study is look at the pre-measures chart and look at specific schools. But what we're seeing here is the schools basically from north of Savage and are the ones that are impacted primarily by 2013. So.
But this is as of the opening of school 2013. What about the...
Both. What I'm saying is this is 2013 if we did not do the 2012 redistricting, if we did not do the 2013 redistricting to open the new school. But if you look at everything that's Savage on south and towards the west, if you didn't do the 2012 redistricting, those are the conditions that would remain. You would
in 2013.
Yeah.
2012 as well.
Yeah.
He's saying it's really not
There's got to be a
much
growth
different.
rate.
It may not be. it's
Not
negligible.
significant enough to change it, I think, is what he's saying.
Okay.
So these
Which is why
changes
doing
that
it
you
in
see
two
in the
pieces is
southeast
okay.
part of the county are the result of the 2012 redistricting.
Okay.
Right.
Well, for example, if you look on page 47, that's the pre-measures for the elementary schools. So if you go to the southeast, you'll see Gorman at 119%, other ones 117, 123 at Athelton.
But those numbers don't include the portables and stuff that are already existing to deal
No,
with
they don't.
current crowding.
Per policy.
The only other thing I would point out is that we are planning a addition at Gorman Crossing, a very large addition at Gorman Crossing in 2014. And one of the thoughts is that if we have to do it anyway, it'd be nice to clear out some of the kids from there so they're not, sitting in an overcrowded school in the middle of a construction project.
I'd like to make a suggestion that
Could I just
it's a
ask my question?
Oh, sorry, sure.
Go
Mr.
ahead, ask your question.
Building off Frank's point, if the downside from delaying from 2012 to 2013 is basically what you've already presented of not doing that, would doing that open up the time? Because I got to admit, Joel, I'm a straight shooter. I've always shot straight with you. I told you what I like. I'm irritated with the fact that we were told that once this feasibility study we could discuss some of these other options, but it seems like if we follow the process, quote unquote, we really can't explore those other options because it jeopardizes it. And so I apologize if I said bait and switch irritated you earlier, because I know you said that underneath your breath that it was not, but I'm irritated. I am. And so if we're able to delay the 2012 to 2013, does that, in your opinion, because I know you're an expert at this and I trust your professional judgment, does that give us the time to be able to evaluate alternatives? Some of which we've talked about philosophically here tonight without getting into the weeds of validity of it. But does that give us enough time to be able to get into the weeds? Because your job is school planning, not school redistricting. You're an expert in this. Does it give us the time to be able to do whatever needs to be done to evaluate those things?
If the charters or whatever to do that type of analysis are actually, initiated, then it's probably it could be combined with 2013. But if they're not, then what Ken and I have been trying to get across to you is that we should just go ahead with the 2012 Southeast redistricting because the relief is needed. There's no point in waiting for the new school. So if the board is really going to, give direction and go on into those matters, then it might be worth it. But I don't think that if we're not going to get into those matters, then I strongly would recommend we proceed with the 2012 elementary redistricting. It is separable
With the evaluation of it. I think
or at least the
that's
evaluation. Yeah, that's the. It is separable from the opening of the new Northeastern Elementary School, but just like presenting this. Sorry, did somebody tell me to stop? Okay.
This French.
I look down sometimes. I apologize. But
No, Dr. Cousin had something to say, so sorry to interrupt you.
no, that's good. It's probably a good time for me.
First of all, I want to put on, this is just a planning document. And it's the task of the committee to come back with recommendations as well. And that is a very, very open process. But in answer to your question about open enrollment, for example, it's going to be difficult to tie that to this feasibility study. What I would suggest is that we look at that as a separate item to come back to you with recommendations and for discussion. It may be different than your interpretation of what was planned, but I think that it really needs the thorough investigation so that, not looking back at the past, but looking at the future as what we could do, if anything, with those type of alternative approaches.
Well, Dr. Cousin, what I would ask is, my concern with this is we have a problem, overcrowding, and it seems like we've confined ourselves to one approach of the solution. Please don't confine your analysis to just open enrollment. You guys are the experts. Look at what we possibly can do and come back to us.
I'll tell you that's what we're going to do.
Wonderful.
I would keep it separate from this round, and it's something that the committee may want to look at. But their charge is, the question about, postponing redistricting and so forth. This is one of the most emotional issues that we go through as a board and with the system. Someone mentioned that, and it's true. And we want it to be so that people understand what's going on, first of all, and that they have exposure to the committee, and we've had people to come in with their own plans. And like I said, it's an elaborate, drawn-out process, and it's an emotional one because we're talking about, moving kids. If I had an alternative, I wouldn't move any. But that is not a possibility unless we're going to be spending capital dollars here as well. But any alternative, as an administration, we'd be willing to consider.
Thank you, Dr. Cousin. Mrs. Valencourt.
Just to clarify at least my position, building on what Mr. Meshkin had said, and I appreciate Dr. Cousin's input there because I agree that we should go ahead and move forward with evaluating all of our options, including how we might proceed with redistricting. What I don't want to have happen is to then in November be told, well, the train has left the station, it's too late to change, to get off of this train now. And that would be my concern. And I, would just echo what Mr. Meshkin is saying. Maybe you all are just more familiar and more comfortable with the way that these things have been going. But, we've had this happen consistently since we started only 6 months ago, where we're trying to find out when is the right time to bring this up. This isn't the right time. That was the right time. That'll be the right time. Now it's too late. And we're trying to work within, the parameters that everybody is comfortable with and that everyone's used to working with. We're just trying to navigate with sort of a blindfold on. So I appreciate the approach. Just please, keep in mind that in November when someone says, okay, well, sorry, we've already done this, now it's too late, we're probably both going to spout.
I don't think there's any guarantee that that's not going to happen because the time frame that over the summertime.
Which is why I proposed the idea, Frank, and actually Frank was the original one that brought it up. Is there a way to delay the 2012 to 2013, and does that open up the time to be able to do that?
And what changes in that year? I mean, are we expecting a big bulge to come through?
But what I'm hearing is a recommendation that we need to go forward with
looking at it.
With looking at redistricting.
As long as everyone understands we're going to keep the idea of not doing it until 2013.
And Dr. Cousin said that they would look into it, but I don't think there's a guarantee that you'll have an answer by November.
Yeah, I think
what Mrs. Valencourt's trying to say is, when we get whatever report we're going to get from or recommendations from the Boundary Line Committee, at that point, the board is still free to say, we decided not to redistrict.
Yeah.
And I think that's correct. That's the way it is. That is correct. At that point, we could say, all right, we're going to
hold off
to a degree, roll the dice, and put up with. I've learned a lot about this over the years, and as many people who don't want to be redistricted, there are just as many people who want to get out of their crowded school. And I can go either way. I've often thought early on that we're better off keeping kids in one location as long as possible.
Especially if there's relief in sight.
With relief in sight, absolutely. You've probably heard me say that a couple times.
Maybe.
I was going to parrot back to you something you said 8 years ago, but I thought that would be too cute. Which was that was a good point. But it really depends on the family's particular situation. If they feel their child is not getting the services they need, and it's because, or at least they think it's because there are too many kids in the school, they just soon go somewhere else.
hence the open enrollment
Yeah.
option.
That's not how.
Ellen, briefly, and then Mr. Dyer.
Well, I just wanted to remind everybody that part of the redistricting is to deal with the fact that we already approved capital additions in places and remodels and things that have to be filled and aren't necessarily just filled by the overcrowding in that existing school. And so there are things that are already in train, that are already part of APFO, that are already part of where we're heading, that do require some redistricting. We cannot open a new school in 2013 and not redistrict. That's not going to happen.
Ellen was suggesting.
But I'm saying that part of the redistricting is to deal with the steps we already took in order to deal with overcrowding that involve different changes at different schools in order to make that work, in order to fix the feeds at a time when we can do it because we're making this change here. So none of this exists in isolation for a particular year. It's all been building towards something a little bit, and it's something that we have to look and see where that goes out beyond that. That's all I'm saying is it's much more than just looking at redistricting. Redistricting is not separate from the capital additions and remodels and all the other things that are on the plate. So,
Mr. Dyer.
Yes, well, I would like to see, on a parallel track with the work that Joel is doing, for us to take that portion of policy which you mentioned earlier that provides for open enrollment and amend it to provide very specifically for the type of situation that we're trying to set up as a possibility. Now, it may not be needed. It may not. We may have some better plans, but we know that changing policy takes time, and we could. I think tonight we could start the process of drafting. Just drafting an amendment so that if it turned out that we would have a situation where we might want to try to encourage specific very overcrowded schools for the families there to consider open enrollment for a short period of time because of certain, what factors would we want to have in that policy? We've been discussing them tonight, but we could enumerate that. So I would move that we initiate an amendment process on that policy.
I don't think your motion is. I think your motion is out of order. It's not part of the usual process in terms of bringing policy and changing it, in the middle of a board meeting. I think
when would we do that in order to not let the time slip away?
When Ms. Albert brings her annual report to us regarding the policy schedule for next year.
Are we going to be so married to policy that we can't respond to a situation and?
Yes, because otherwise we would be considered arbitrary and capricious. We can't just change things based upon whim. We have to be a responsible body that follows a structure. We really do. Lawsuits will follow if we do not. I've heard that before. Or if we do. And if we look at the quarterly agenda, you will see that the report I mentioned is coming.
Right.
Just read the quarterly agenda. Can we please move on?
Yeah, I think this is a report. Although you've asked for guidance, you have a committee in place, and I don't think we need to take any action. I think, you can move.
When you bring the committee forward.
Move the
Is the committee in
forward.
place?
You have the committee in place, is that correct?
Well, he'll bring the names.
We have the people that we have interviewed all the people that we are considering, but we do not have the committee in place at this time.
Okay, so you would bring that to us at the next meeting?
It's committee's advisory to superintendent, so I would bring it to the superintendent, and then the superintendent would make a report during his period of time on the agenda to announce the committee.
When will that be?
I think it's next meeting.
Next
And you
meeting?
would probably do that for the next meeting? Is that
Because they meet in June. They
It's
meet in
not on
June.
the agenda.
Not on the agenda.
It's not on the agenda. Madam Chair?
Because it's a
Looked a couple of
report.
times.
Part of the superintendent's report.
It's probably just part of his report.
Madam Chair, I don't feel comfortable if we are, as a body here, given any type of consideration or guidance to this. If that's going to be recorded in the minutes, Ms. Hanks, I absolutely do not feel comfortable whatsoever, just previous question, moving this on in the current state of the debate. I don't think that would be reflective of the debate we've had here. I mean, if we're saying we're not going to act, then what do we do? I mean, I could make a motion and say, I propose that we delay the 2012 redistricting to 2013, but we're saying that's out of order because this is just a report and not an action item. So exactly what are we doing here? I don't understand what we're being asked to give guidance on that we're not officially able to give guidance on because giving guidance is out of order. I'm confused. What guidance are we giving?
We're not. We got the presentation. We got a report.
The report
So
asks for guidance.
No, the report just mentions that guidance would be part of what comes forward when they make a recommendation from the superintendent
That's
based
not
on
what
the
it
work that
says,
they're
Alan.
going to
That's not what it says.
Then perhaps it was just an error in language, but the superintendent presents a proposal of what the superintendent plans to do based upon the superintendent and staff's assessment of the needs of what is best for the school system. So they're reporting on future action.
And then we're going to be in a situation where we won't be able to have the time to deliberate on issues that are a matter of the Board of Education by virtue of the fact that the train has left the station previously. I'm just not comfortable with that. I don't think it does a service to the superintendent, to his staff, because then they're going to have, poor Mr. Galley and Mr. Roy have been standing there for 30 minutes.
What are you suggesting, Mr.?
I'm suggesting that the board does not give guidance on at this point in time. If we're going to have action on this, then let's put it on the agenda for June 21st and let's take action on it to give them some form of guidance.
We're not taking action.
Mr. Aquino?
But when are we going
The
to?
report specifically asks for some guidance, and as I stated probably 20 or 25 minutes ago, I think it's fair for Mr. Galliu to point out those issues and for us to hopefully come to some consensus on the questions that he has.
Thank you, Mr.
I don't have a problem with that.
That would be
I mean,
logical.
we alluded to that earlier. I alluded to that earlier in response to a concern that Mrs. French raised. And if there's a question about what direction you should be taking, and the board can give you that direction. So you mentioned one thing that popped out was the suggestion that we continue to make use of West Friendship as long as possible. I have no problem with that. I don't think anybody has any problem with that. Is there anything else you'd like to point us to, so that you specifically need guidance other than ultimately we're going to say, or at least accede to the fact that you're going to proceed with the formation of the attendance area? What are we calling it now?
It's the
It's had
attendance area
3 names over
committee.
the last 7 years.
It's the
Attendance area committee.
Attendance area committee. Well, I'll put your attention back to page 47, Southeastern Region. Because I need to answer the question better than I answered it before. I showed these graphics and they didn't exactly answer the question about what happens if we don't take action on just the 2012 redistricting. Well, the answer can be seen by looking at, on page 47, the pre-measures. The Southeastern region will be at 106.3% utilization, with some schools as high as 123% utilization. Then you can turn to page 50, and you can find the exact same spot. This is the after condition. If that redistricting that staff talked about in this document were implemented, Southeastern region would be at 98.4% utilization. And the highest school would be 113% utilization.
Question.
Not perfect, but it's a plan. So that's the staff answer as to not going forward with the redistricting. Now, to come back to your question, it is a large, complicated effort to field this committee and so forth. So if there is a possibility that the decision, that there's an intention not to go ahead and make a decision on redistricting, then it's probably worth talking about the amount of time and workflow in terms of having this committee. I mean, I think it's worth talking about that.
But how can we
Completely
make
agree.
a decision about that without having listened to what they say?
Mr. Aquino?
I think from the standpoint of, I think we learn a lot from the committee, as you've mentioned. I know Mrs. Giles and I have served on the committee, and while as difficult as the task may be, as by your own admission, sometimes you get a better answer or better ideas. And I don't have a problem with the committee.
That's correct.
I don't think I'm ready to tell you right now that I'm willing to forego 2012 redistricting. Given some of the emails we've seen about some of the changes in the APFO chart, I think we have to consider redistricting. I'm not going to suggest to you it's the only thing we should consider, but I think that's the way we have to have that in our back pocket for 2012, if necessary. The committee could come back to us and say, you know what, you really only need another year. I remember standing right there many years ago saying that the goal of the committee at that time was to get us to what?
Oh.
2000, was it even 2000 something? I don't even remember.
Yeah, we were 2000 something.
And after that, all bets were off. We were in a very strange situation at the time, and you needed some breathing room for I think it was 2 or 3 years.
Okay, that's helpful.
Is there any other? Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I mean, is there any other specific issue, question that we may have missed? I should probably page through this because I annotated my copy fairly heavily.
So do we have consensus then regarding keeping West Friendship
In use.
in use?
As long as necessary.
Possible.
And now we're addressing the issue of whether we have consensus in terms of
Go ahead and form the committee.
forming the committee.
Is that okay?
Yep. that's fine.
And Dr. Cousin has
Without any
suggested that we're going to
preconceived notions.
have discuss other options.
Well, the committee never comes in with preconceived notions. I mean, the committee comes in with its own notions.
But the committee is chartered for redistricting now, and that's what she was trying to say. The committee's chartered for attendance area review. By definition, in the words chosen, they're going to be reviewing the attendance areas, which is another polite way of saying redistricting. So, with all due respect,
no.
And why not?
No, I'm just saying, if Cindy made the comment that they should be looking at other areas, and then Ellen said, well, they are going to be looking at other areas, but that's not what they're chartered
But
to do.
they've always made suggestions about other options to look at. I've
For
never been on a committee where they did. No,
redistricting, not
even
looking
for-
at board policies, not looking at other things that could be done.
This doesn't, you guys are talking over each other. This doesn't have to be this contentious. You're all talking about the same thing.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing.
I apologize, because it's getting late. I know we're getting a little testy. But you're both talking about the same thing. And I think when you put 12 citizens from Howard County in the same room to discuss this incredibly volatile issue, we get a lot of opinion. We get not only the 12 people in the room, Mr. Galliu, it's often quite crowded and unfortunately quite hot in that room. And there's the comments from the citizens is substantial. And as Joel's already said, sometimes the best ideas come from those comments. And I think if we shut that down, we're doing ourselves a disservice for this year.
I agree with you.
So I think right now we've put everything on the table. Mr. Galliu has his answers, I believe, and the superintendent has addressed your concern to make sure that we move on and look at other alternatives
Correct.
in parallel.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you,
Let
Mr.
me just say one final thing.
Dr.
Are you sure you want to?
This document has come a long ways.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
It really looks at both the capital budget and capital planning along with redistricting. There were two separate processes in the past. And so this has become a valuable tool and having outlined at least what some recommendations could be. I've never known the committee to accept the staff recommendation in its entirety. There's always some change, and usually, I shouldn't say usually, it's a change for the better because of that input that we have from the citizens group. So sometimes you have to muddle your way through.
Okay.
Okay.
Gentlemen, you have your answers? Thank you.
Thank you.
Mrs. French?
I apologize for saying it's on the next quarterly agenda. Actually, it's on the next meeting's agenda. 2011-12 Policy Development and Revision Activity.
Even better.
Thank you.
Report action.
Next is Elementary World Language Report.
At least have a 2-minute break to stand. I just can't sit anywhere.
Good evening.
Only 15.